Yeah. Okay. We'll get into some of the funny thing about like woke definitions of things here soon when the hit when I will give you Guillermo del Toro's exact wording on what a fascist is, and you can describe to me who seems that way, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
The Criterion Collection DVD and Blu-ray release of the film has the spine number 666, a clever play on words with the film's title. Fables, and this ties back when I said earlier, this is more like a fable / fairy tale where, the child's abandoned and then, they go on to, do all that. But more so than that, and he stresses this so much in the commentary, that this is his ode to the Gothic romance. And the what he means by that is they're older, and this guy he knows his Gothic romance, So we've discussed in the past that Mike, from the Rain Man Network, talks about, he's got a line that he says that when you know the structures and the ins and outs of a certain genre, then you can twist them and break them, to kind of mess with the conventions, but only if you know the ins and outs well enough to be able to do it properly. If you listen to Guillermo del Toro talk about what a Gothic romance is, this man knows way more than most people ever know in their life about it. So if he mentions that he did twist the conventions of them, because in the traditional Gothic romance, it's the ghost is always the bad guy.
Okay, yeah.
But in his film, his film broke that convention. Santi is the tragic figure. Yeah. Jacinto is the bad guy. So that's it, but he knows where to break it, because he knows what the genre is about. It's usually, if you hear him describe it, there's always large architecture that all but swallows up the humans. So it emphasizes the, like almost, like God or some otherworldly entity has more, is more in effect in a Gothic romance than the people themselves. They're kind of like players in a game that's outside their control, and the structures that they're in kind of represent that, because they're always in large mansions, castles. The cistern in this movie stands in for that.
Oh yeah, and the cistern itself, looks like a big architecture that can swallow you up.
Yeah, and so it kind of gives you that feeling that there's like it's just that there's other entities out there that are controlling everything, controlling fate, and you're living, you're a play inside of that.
Yeah.
It usually shows how small man is in the cosmic scheme. It's usually repressive sexually, which plays into this movie because there's like Jacinto is like, with Carmen, but like, she's, like Cesares is repressed, sexually, and they don't really bring, he doesn't really mention anything. And Carmen obviously doesn't, because, the whole thing with her, and the younger man that she's with.
Yeah.
And the Gothic romance always involves the element of the supernatural, which is Santi, so that plays into it. I already mentioned that he blamed his Mexican heritage for his love of melodrama and insertion into this film.
Don't blame it on your Mexican heritage. You like a good drama for your mama, okay? Don't put it on us. Don't put it on our people. But he's 100% right.
This film and Hellboy feel the most personal to Del Toro because they contain so many references to his own childhood.
Jesus Christ, in what way?
Well, it's because in both movies there's a child that's being abused.
Okay.
In Hellboy, it's Liz, the girl who's got the psychic powers, and then in this one it's Carlos.
Okay. I thought it was because of all the fucking scary shit going on.
No, good Lord, somebody get that man a therapist.
I know.
Santi is Del Toro's favorite creature design of all the films that he's done, and that includes Pan's Labyrinth, which has some of the craziest and most out there, designs. But he just loves the simplicity of Santi.
I 100% agree with that. Because Santi is like a definition of horror, but also empathy.
Yeah, there's a sadness in
yes.
him. And I don't know if you can look in the show notes. What I've got next, I put a couple of good pictures in here that I took when I was watching the movie that you can't really get a good look at until you see the production photos.
Yeah.
But those rust tears that are coming down, like you don't notice them in the movie so much, but when you see them like on full display, you could tell he's like you feel bad for this ghost. He's constantly weeping,
By the way, I've done eyes like that around my hubby, the purplest bruised licking eyes. Fairly easy to do, actually, because I'm no makeup artist.
And then the cracks, of course. That, I think that's fantastic how they did that.
Reverend, that's a butt crack. Why did you put that in here? That is so inappropriate.
It's Del Toro's butt crack.
Oh.
Del Toro felt that a ghost was a reminder of the past. It's part of the Gothic aesthetic.
Yes.
Santi is designed to look like a discarded porcelain doll that was left forgotten in a child's attic.
And he did,
he has the cracks, like we said, in his white porcelain skin. And Del Toro was very specific in how many cracks were apparent because he wanted the child to look more sympathetic and less scary.
Yeah.
And when they first came back with the design, they had cracks all over the face, and he said no. And they went back and forth, and he kept saying no, remove these, and like because he wanted the child to be the one that you feel sorry for once you actually have more time with him, and that's another reason. This was something I figured Noah would comment on the movie, that like the ghost doesn't scare you after a certain point, but it's deliberate. He wants you to spend time with Santi because he wants you to be like Carlos and get used to the ghost and to understand that the ghost is not there to scare you. The ghost is just trapped there because, of the circumstances that happened.
Yeah. Before I even knew the tragic story behind Santi, when I saw the cracks, I was like, that is where he got hit, and that's what his skull looks like. So I almost like his skin and his skull were kind of blended into one. I'm thinking that's how his skull was cracked,
Yes, it's like the skull made an appearance. It's like you can see through it, and you can see what through the skin and kind of see what's going on underneath.
Yeah, so that's I don't know. Either way, it works no matter how he meant it for it to be interpreted.
That's a good point. And there's references in the movie to the cracks in his skin. There's a scene where Carlos is cracking an egg, and it's kind of like a visual rhyme or representation of Santi, in that sense, because, the way it fractures.
Talk about an Easter egg.
Del Toro cites the one. I love this part of it. Whenever I was listening to him talk in the commentary, he cites the one sentence horror story about the last man in the world for his concept of what he believes a good horror story is. And if you don't know what that story is, it's literally just the last man in the world is sitting alone in his, on his couch or whatever in his room with the door locked, and there's a knock at the door, and that's the story. That's it. But you put yourself in that context. Well, if there's all these dead bodies outside and he's the last one, who's knocking on the door, and then the creep sets in whenever you start thinking about it.
I don't like that story.
And I love that he mentions that, because that to me is what creates a truly good horror story. I agree with him, because and his idea of a horror story is it's built by the context of what's happening, not just by the cheap scares of like a cat jumping out or something. You'll jump and fright, but it doesn't actually settle in on you and give you that creepy vibe, like that horrific, sense that you get if you build the atmosphere and the context around it.
Yeah.
It's interesting that this was mentioned on the supplemental features, that Santi's appearance looks quite a bit like images of dead children that were circulated during the war as like a propaganda thing. They started posting these like posters or missing, like kid type posters around the, or bulletins.
Yeah.
And the kids in the images looked like Santi. They kind of had the blackened, like eyes, the, kind of like the sunken in face, the pale skin, so he's kind of built to look like ones that they actually circulated during war, which is interesting.
Damn.
He did not want Santi to look like one of the undead. He wanted him to have more of a spiritual appearance.
Okay.
And that's the reason for the blood flowing from the wound and some other choices to make the character feel more surreal.
Yeah.
In fact, the name Santi is a play on the word Santos or saint.
Yes.
Which is symbolized by the image of him standing on the water in one scene. The blood flowing from his head wound gives kind of like a halo effect to him. And the black eyes with the red rims and rust tears flowing down his face give more like a martyred saint type appearance. Interesting fact, and I didn't realize this till they pointed out, the rust that he is crying matches the rust that's on the orphanage itself and the rust that's on the bomb.
Oh my God. So that makes sense. Yeah, because I'm like, this looks familiar, but like, why? Because at first I thought maybe it was just tears of the water, the water coming through that he was in.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's just it matches the rundown, rusty appearance of everything that the world that they're living in, basically.
Yeah, and then rust tears of almost like those. I think you have it in your thing though, like the statues you see of the angels or the saints.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
His skin actually has multiple color layers whenever you actually get right down and look at it. There's the white, main layer that's for the porcelain, which is also thematic because to Del Toro, the absence of life equals absence of color. So that's the reason, he looks the way he does. There's black underneath to kind of accentuate the fractures, make them stand out. There's yellow highlights to offset the rust tears, and then there's green underneath that to give a sense of decay. So like with the edges of the paint, you can actually see like the decayed like green settling in and like the jaws and stuff.
Oh my God.
He didn't want Santi to have feet originally because in most ghost stories, the spirits don't have them. However, he didn't have the budget for wire work or CGI to remove the feet, so he worked the feet into the design, and that's why you got the scene where Carlos knocks over the water, and then you see the ghosts, the footprints in the water kind of walking away from it.
Yeah.
He did that because he's like, well, if I got to have feet, then I'm going to make, I'm going to use them, basically.
And that is so funny. That is such a Mexican thing, that the spirits don't have feet. And feet are very important in some cases because, like, for instance, there's this old tale of a woman who is an evil entity and she lures men, but she's not so much a ghost, she's just an evil entity. And that she's, if you pay attention to her feet, they're backwards. And if they're backwards, she's the bad person.
Oh, okay.
So
that's interesting.
Yeah, Mexicans are obsessed with feet.
Well, that's also like, that reminds me of what Baba Yaga, because she's got like chicken feet or something. If you look at her feet, and that's like the sign that you can tell that, there's something, really messed up with her. But by the time you see that, you're probably dead anyway.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. He didn't have the budget to give Santi the skeleton appearance beneath the skin during every scene, so the compromise was to make him appear that way in Moonlight. What I'm talking about, if you watch it, I love this effect whenever there's the nighttime scenes with Santi and the moonlight shines across his face. You can actually, the way they made the skin look, you can actually see the bones underneath, and he looks skeletal.
That's really cool, actually.
There's a subtle sound of water squishing when Santi moves, which I need to go back and watch because I didn't catch that, but that's apparently a thing. He whispers in an almost asthmatic way to use the sound to further express his vulnerable feeling and make you feel sad for him. And Del Toro actually lost his voice from illness toward the end of the shoot, and he recorded some of Santi's lines with his weakened voice to add the asthmatic sound. So he said whenever you hear that kind of like that wheezing, raspy stuff, that's actually a little bit of his voice modulated in with a child.
That reminds me of the Changeling a little bit too.
Del Toro wanted boys at the orphanage to have crew cuts, but the budget made it difficult to make Santi look the way he wanted with more scalp showing, so they settled on a bowl cut look, which is appropriate to the period, to cover up the scalp and save some on the makeup budget.
Okay.
Mario Bava was an inspiration for the use of color in this movie. Colors are coded to the characters, and certain colors are saved for dramatic effect. Along with the sets and costume design, the almost sepia tone color palette established the 1930s setting.
Yes, for sure.
The wall behind Santi at the end of the hall that you mentioned earlier, as he is stalking Carlos, is actually matched perfectly to Santi's skin completely because it's got the same colors that Santi's skin has. So it's got the same decayed appearance that Santi does.
That stood out a lot.
For blood scenes only.
Wow.
There's only red in this movie whenever it's blood. Like
okay.
that's the only time that he allowed any red in the movie. And the rest of the movie is earth tones. Like during the day, gold, brown, and rust, and at night it's bluish tones. You know, to kind of give that an effect, kind of like moonlight, bluish white for lighting.
Yeah.
Sergio Leone was the inspiration for how the daytime scenes were filmed and the characters' interactions during the day. That's why you get the Western aesthetic, because he was actually basing it upon those spaghetti Westerns.
Oh,
so
okay.
that matches what we talked about. Jacinto is meant to be the person you fear in the film, not the ghost, which is, like I said, an inversion of the traditional Gothic, because it's usually the spirits, the one that's always the one the protagonist has to deal with.
Yeah.
It started now this is interesting. It started as a story that was meant as a thesis for Del Toro's screenwriting class, but the original film was much different than what we see now. It was originally set in Mexico instead of Spain.
Yeah.
And the theme was a region of mountain called the Devil's Backbone, which is in lore is supposed to be the corpse of Satan after an epic fight between Lucifer and God, and Lucifer was cast to earth. And the orphanage was supposed to be located at the base of the mountains, or the corpse of Satan, in other words. And his influence was extending out from his corpse and affecting those children who were in the orphanage. Del Toro says that the story was so different and that he'll never get around this because he's always got all something on his back burner to do. But he said that it's actually so different he could revisit it and make a whole movie out of it and call it like it's like a redux of the Devil's Backbone, but set in his original
Spine
setting.
of the devil.
It was much later, whenever he met with his friend Antonio, the trash man, as we said earlier.
Tres horas.
That they took the base idea of the orphanage and completely built a ghost film from the ground up.
Okay.
In the film we have, the Devil's Backbone is a reference to Spina Bifida, which is, those pickled punks, as he likes to call them, that Dr. Cesares is got in his, his room. And the weird thing about that is that that's actually Del Toro was doing a tour in France with his wife, and they came across the pickled punks, and he found the formula there, and he read the ingredients in it that they used to pickle them, and he's like, this actually would make a very good rum. And he turned to his wife and he said, wouldn't you like to drink this? And she looked at him and said, you're gross, stop that. And he said,
oh my God,
I'll put it in a movie. And he did. He put it in this movie, and the reason it's in there the way it is.
Gross.
The references of the children with spina bifida are actually references back to the children in the movie that we're following, because they're all marked with tragedy, like the fetuses are marked with their disfigurement. A repeating theme throughout the movie is being trapped. The living are trapped within the relationships and the physical location of the orphanage. The idea that a ghost is like a bug trapped in amber factored into the way that Santi was presented, which I really like that concept of a ghost.
Yeah.
And to reinforce these themes visually, arches are used throughout the architecture to trap the humans and ghosts within the frame. So that, that kind of adds to the fact that they're kind of like, like the arches are a permanent fixture over their heads, kind of just like trapping them there visually.
Yeah, but when it, I feel like, okay, within the building, but there's arches throughout the whole architecture in general. So wouldn't it technically trap them in the room or the location that they're in?
Well, I think it's just the overall feeling of being.
I have some questions.
But I agree with you. I mean, there's also an arch as you're leaving the orphanage. So there's even that trap if you're going outside of it.
I mean, like Hotel California, man, you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. I don't know, man. I saw some people leaving.
Well, we'll get to that here in a second. The scene where Jacinto is speared was accomplished by making a life-size mold of the actor using a rubbery skin-like material and then stabbed through, as we've seen in the film. They actually, they completely covered this guy in his stuff. They basically made a whole mold of his entire body. Because, well, they had to, because the way that it was filmed, you would have got the same effect, and they were specifically wanted him to get stabbed in the armpit, because there's something about being stabbed in that spot that's so vulnerable that that's instinctively painful to humans to think about.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
Del Toro used non-traditional camera work to capture the child actors in the films. And what I mean by that is, since he wanted them to act like children, he knew that their actions couldn't always be scripted. So he filmed a lot more coverage scenes, meaning he had a lot more cameras on them when they were just doing their own thing in the background, so that he could get more images to edit in later and work into the film, so that it looked like they were, naturally playing with each other whenever they, in those scenes that called for that.
Fucking genius, dude. It's the simplest things, I swear, sometimes that make for the best scenes.
Yeah, and and it adds to the feeling of the movie, because you can tell when the kids are acting like stiff and like too grown up like, because like I said, The Ring, the American version specifically, but I don't know, I can't levy that against the Asian one, because I know, like, Japanese kids are expected to function in a different way around their, like around adults, but there's no way that an American kid's going to act like that kid did in that movie. It was unnatural feeling.
Yeah.
Fernando Tielve was given the homework assignment of coming up with his character's biography of Carlos.
Wow.
And this was to add authenticity to the character and give real motivations from a child's point of view. So he actually, all that stuff about the slugs and all that was from the actor. He was the one like, well, I think he'd be in the comic books. I think he would like, and Del Toro said, all right, that sounds good. We'll do that.
Oh, wow. How, as a kid, could you fucking imagine? Well, and Guillermo del Toro wasn't that big at the time, but you're in a movie. That's completely exciting as it is already for a kid, depending on what this actor did prior. I don't know if he was already in a film prior to this. 2, you get to tell him what to do.
Well, you get to have some say so in the character. I think that's pretty neat. Because most kids don't. You get that with adult actors, because they get to bring their their thoughts and interpretations of the role, but you never see that with kids, because they don't have. Generally, they're not given that much leeway, because the director either doesn't feel like they'll do it justice and or bring anything meaningful to the table, or they like the kids maybe don't feel comfortable enough to do it. So It's interesting that it worked out for both of them that way.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
The theme of Dr. Cesare's impotence extends to his entire characterization. He's not just impotent in the sense that he can't please Carmen, but he's also, if you look at what he actually does in the movie, he's impotent in the fact that he's inactive through through his life at least. He doesn't really solve anything or intervene. It's only whenever he's a spirit that he actually helps the kids, and even then, they have to do the fighting on their own. He just merely gives them a way to get out of the room that they're locked in.
Yeah, well, it's at the end of the movie he finally gets hard, but yeah, I didn't even think about that.
It took rigor mortis for him to actually get stiff. Is that what you're trying to say?
And maybe he stayed behind for Carmen, maybe for one last hurrah. Okay.
Well, maybe. He was able to do some things then.
Let me show you what I'm working with now.
And that's the reason that Del Toro wanted that actor, Federico, to play the part, because he'd already worked with him and knew he could do this. But he knew that since the character didn't, actually have any development, story-wise that way, he needed to be somebody who could show that his development was all internal. And he knew that actor could pull it off. And I feel like that he is a good actor in this movie. Like you can tell a lot of, like he conveys a lot of emotion without saying it.
Yeah.
It was important for both Del Toro and Eduardo Noriega that Jacinto have scenes in the film that humanize the character. They didn't want him to be a cartoon, one-sided villain.
Yeah.
And his scenes in particular with Conchita are meant to show his fears and motivations. Even his scene where he kills Santi shows him scared after accidentally pushing Santi into the column. It's not like he felt good about it. You could still see that. He knew that he fucked up. So he's not, he's bad, but he's still got some humanity to him.
Yeah, one thing I didn't get in terms of Santi and why do I keep forgetting his name? Jacinto. Yeah, was there's one scene where Santi is telling Carlos bring Jacinto to me, but I'm like, he had been there majority of the time. Why couldn't you get your paws on him prior?
Well, I think that he needed he could get that Santi wasn't strong enough, because that's one nitpick that I was anticipating Noah to bring up. That's the reason I made fun of it at the beginning of the intro. The fact that, you've got this ghost kid, but there's the scene where he doesn't, like, Carlos has locked himself inside the linen closet, and and the ghost just appears outside and looks through, which is a nice jump scare, but like he doesn't actually, just walk through it like you would expect a ghost to do. And it's almost like Santi is not like, he's not experienced enough as a spirit or powerful enough to be able to actually do stuff like that. So I think that his fear of like what he can actually manipulate is like localized to near his body. So I think that he needed other people to get Jacinto that close, and Jacinto, either due to fear or whatever, was never going to set foot near that water unless he, or, close enough to that water unless he, got in a situation where he couldn't get away from it.
Well, you couldn't see from the camera angles, but what had actually happened in that scene where the ghost had looked through the keyhole was that it was an archway closet door, so he couldn't pass through.
No, I mean, there's always, well, the keyhole itself was an arch, so I mean,
that's
there's
true,
that whole image too. I mean, I didn't have a problem with the fact he couldn't go through the door, because there's several movies that have ghosts that can't. But I just figured that'd be something Noah would have brought up. He's like, this ghost can't even fucking travel through doors.
Well, what's cool about that though? For me, it was scarier because it's like, okay, when is this ghost gonna fucking go away? Like, when you walk out that door, are you gonna be safe?
Yeah, and then you think it's like, okay, it's been enough time, and then he looks out and it's like, no, his fucking eyes right there. He's still around.
Yeah, surprise, motherfucker.
Surprise!
I got you now, bitch.
But I don't know. I mean, it made sense to me. I mean, within the context of the movie, I don't think that he violated any of his rules, because I don't think it ever showed Santi dissolving through anything necessarily. I mean, I feel like he always tried to open things when he went through them.
Hold on. I'm pondering on that. Yeah. I guess I didn't even fucking notice that.
Because, I mean, there's never a time where I really remember him walking through anything. It's like he appears places, but he doesn't necessarily. And I guess you could argue that he could disappear and reappear inside the room. But that's true, another thing that Del Toro was bringing up, is that he didn't want Santi to be the villain, so he didn't want him to actually aggressively go after Carlos.
No,
he was just trying to, he was just trying to like tug on his shoulder and say, listen, I need your help. Like,
well,
please.
And coming from, someone who believes in things spiritually and everything, it is a big thing about being invited. Now, you don't necessarily have to let an evil entity in, but I think ghosts in general, or spirits that maybe mean well and really do just need help, if they know they're not invited or they're unwelcome in any way, they won't push it, generally. So it's like the energy. It's like, oh, this energy builds up a block. You don't want me to come near you, so I physically can't. It's not that they don't want to, and definitely not for a lack of trying. It's almost like a physical, I can't. You have this wall built up, and until you let that down, I can't let you know what I need or blah, blah, blah,
I mean, that's a very good point, because they always make, a point in saying in any kind of paranormal stuff that, you can have receptive energy, meaning you're willing to let spirits in, and you got, and that can be dangerous depending upon what spirit you're talking about. So there has to be a reverse of that, by, so if you put a repulsive, like signal out there, like, I do not want you around, that's almost like a defense against them. They can't cross at that point.
Yeah, and I think on the contrary, people who just flat out just don't believe in it, they just don't have any barriers up because they don't believe that they need a barrier, So that's why you hear these ghost stories. Everyone's like, well, how did they didn't even believe in that shit. How did they invite a ghost in? No, they didn't invite them. They just didn't have they didn't have a house protecting over them, That would be like, hey, you can't come here.
But I feel like some people are so skeptical that they actually have a permanent barrier up because they can't experience anything. And, you see that in a lot of horror films where, like, say the husband, I mean, what's in the orphanage? I mean, we already talked about it. The husband, the doctor, he doesn't believe his wife. He's like, you're fucking insane. There's nothing happening here. And that's because he's so against the idea of her. And it's only at the end of it, whenever he's went through all the loss, that he accepts it a little bit, and he actually gets like there's just a hint of his wife she opens the door up to let him know that she's there.
Yeah, and he paid the price. You know what? The husbands never believe their Mexican wives. They always think we're crazy. And we are, but not when it comes to the spirits.
But then there's also the other films like the Amityville Horror where the husband doesn't necessarily. I mean, he's not a skeptic totally, but he doesn't necessarily believe either, and so he's more prone, like you said, to be the one that's possessed and ends up hurting the family because he won't admit that he's wrong. First of all, which you can argue whatever you want to about men and that, but I mean, he also won't he won't admit there's any supernatural until every other proof has been given him that's you're wrong, motherfucker, this ain't right, you've got to accept it now, and then he finally changes his ways.
Yeah, too little too late, sir. It's too late to apologize.
Getting back to this, the bomb represents the Civil War, that the Civil War has made its way inside to the walls of the orphanage itself.
Yeah.
It's actually a bit of a historical cheat because bombs at the time were much smaller and dropped from windows in the plane. It wasn't until later in World War II, whenever they developed the bomb chutes and the larger bombs. But Del Toro, he allowed that historical cheat just because he thought that it was more impressive visually to have it drop, the way it did and how large it was. It was you cannot see it whenever you're in the courtyard, so it's always there, just like the war is always there, even if it's in the background.
Yeah.
And this was actually, there's a whole special on this from a Spanish Civil War scholar, Sebastian Faber, on the Criterion disc. So the Franco regime lasted until 1975. So when this happened in the 30s, It didn't end until the 70s.
Damn.
At the time that the movie was made, there was concern. There was actually, and it was made in 2001, mind you, only, just 30 some years, less than 30 years after the fascists had, actually they went back to, a republic again. There was concerns at the time that the Spanish democracy was on the verge of collapse or going into another civil war. So it was almost like this movie was made at a time when history was repeating itself.
Wow.
Which ties into the idea of a ghost being a tragedy that keeps repeating. It's almost like the war itself is repeating.
Damn.
The war resulted in two distinct divisions. You had the Democratic rebels who took control of the mines, and then the Republicans who took control of the banks. And that's the reason why Carmen was so obsessed with the gold, because they didn't have any money. It was the Franco regime that had all the money, and what money they had, they were running out quick trying to finance, the soldiers and the food and stuff necessary to fight the war. The end of the movie represented the beginning of the fascist regime. Thematically, it's a bit at odds with the happy escape of the boys from the orphanage, because even though they're escaping from the orphanage, they're escaping into a country that has fallen. I mean, when they leave the orphanage, they've lost the war. So, and it could be representative of the Spanish people themselves after having witnessed so many deaths and loss of their leadership, as in the boys in the orphanage lost all their leaders, Carmen and Dr. Cesares. They're metaphorically entering a time of being in the desert, lost, kind of like in the Bible. So that's not it's not a happy ending.
Yeah.
when you look at it that way.
I didn't think it was when they were leaving. Yes, I saw that they were leaving, but I don't have an explanation for this, but I thought they were already dead. And technically they were already dead. They were either probably soon to be dead or eventually. It was almost like it was seeing the future of, they're not stuck in this place, but they're dead, And I don't know why I thought that when I was seeing the end.
The eerie thing about whenever he was talking about this is he said if you look at the time that the boys would have got out of that orphanage in 39 versus in 75, whenever they would have saw their country come back, they would have been 50 some years old. So it would have taken them 50. I mean, it would have taken them. I mean, they would have been that old from the time they were kids to their till they actually saw like that they were no longer in the desert, basically.
Dang.
So it's a very, very bittersweet ending. The fact that they get away from Jacinto just to, go to where they did.
Yeah, but people who don't know historically what's actually going on, that are not paying attention, and that's usually someone like me. They're like, "Oh, they got away. Good for them." Okay, where are they gonna go though? Even if there wasn't a war going on, where are they gonna go? They're an orphanage. Okay, I mean, like, those were already bad places back in the day to begin with. Okay, they might get adopted. They might get put into some kind of slavery of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God.
And they, so they, I mean, and they didn't have any family left.
Yeah.
So who's going to take them in? They were basically going to be, I mean, the best that they could do is to be like those kids from I hate to say this, but that Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, the one kids that are living out in the plain where they're doing all the weird stuff about the before times and, and
Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, literally the Lord of the Flies. We're going right back to it. I mean, and I think that might be why that stuck with me so much.
Yeah,
it's these boys are on their own at that point. I mean, and we've we know in that novel what happens when boys are left to their own. Like, I mean, it's not necessarily the best when they're left to their own devices that way.
They should have played "The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow" at the end to give that warm, fuzzy feeling that nothing was gonna go wrong.
Yeah. Little orphanage. Yeah. The lesson that the students listen to about the mammoth plays into the ending of the film, which I find so neat that he worked that in there that way. So when she's telling them about how, like, she's like, so how do you take down a mammoth, or a mammoth, as she says, which I find that such an interesting way of saying that. But it's, she talks about how you got this big creature, and you got these weaker creatures, the humans, trying to take it down. Well, they have to work together. And that's literally what happens with Jacinto. They've got this big guy who can outpower any of them individually, but when they're all work together to trap him and to attack him with sharpened sticks, which goes back to the mammoth fighting again, that's how they take him down.
Yeah, actually. I mean, I did not take those lessons. I did not take that lesson and put it into what they were doing at the end of the film.
I got to admit, it was in the special features and I was like, oh my God, that is so good. Like, I would have never thought about that. Jacinto actually represents the fascist element that's within the orphanage, and in the sense that he's perfect in body and self-assured of himself, just like the people who are taking over the country were dead set. They knew they were right. So that's the reason they were fighting the war to begin with. However, he does lack heart and is lonely, and that's based on Del Toro's reading of like serial killers and how loneliness factors into their motives. He goes on a big thing during the commentary talking about how, like, if you look at most serial killers, it's either because their mother didn't love them, or like there was a family element missing, but the loneliness, there's a loneliness there that factors into them later becoming the monsters that they become. And he played that into Jacinto. The rebels in the movie all have some kind of physical infirmity. Cazares is impotent, like we said. Carmen is crippled, missing her leg. And the boys are all physically immature, meaning that, not like powerful enough to take on Jacinto, like we said, by themselves. They have to join together to overcome their failings in order to actually fight against the fascist element.
Okay.
So...
But Cazares, whatever, but I'm pronouncing it the way it's supposed to be. Okay, he's impotent, but that's
Cazares, there you go.
He's not like that's not like impairing him in any ways other than the fact that he can't bang a chick. Maybe emotionally, well, I get emotionally, but I mean, come on.
Yeah, but I mean, he also, like, when he's given a moment there where he could have stood up and did something, I mean, that shows his impotence in other portions of his life. He's kind of a coward. Like, when he sees the rebels, including one that he worked with, a tutor, that actually brought Carlos there, pleading with him, it's, like, he just like, nope, don't know these bastards. I'm moving on, pop them in the back of the head,
Oh my God, that's pretty funny though.
So you can decide your own version of this. This is what fascism is described by Del Toro. It's antisocial and disenfranchised of humanity. It's asserted by people who believe they are superior and in possession of the truth. and it can divide the world into, and it's by people who can divide the world into exclusively black and white and make it their sole purpose to erase what is black and unfair. I feel like if you applied that modern times, no, I'm gonna leave it there.
Yeah, I'm like, that's. I mean, I know he's speaking a different language, and I know how like you'll use the term, they're very black or white, Yeah. And you can, and it's not to describe necessarily color, but it's just to describe the different contrast between the people. I know that's what he's trying to say. It's just not translating very well.
Well, I mean, even if you don't take it from that, I'm just reading it. It's just like, okay, modern times.
Yes.
The people who know that they're right in what they believe, everybody else is evil or are in the wrong.
Yeah.
And the people who, it's like the side that is more like that is not necessarily the side that thinks that it's on the right side of history. I'm just saying that.
Yeah. It's funny because it's the side that are being his definition of fascist are calling everyone else fascist.
Yes, exactly. I just thought it's funny because everything about them follows his definition of what fascism is, but they're calling everybody else the fascist.
Oh my God.
The scenes were Casares. Is that how you say that it's pronounced? Is saying goodbye to Carmen after the bombing was actually an addition improvement by the actor. That whole idea of him reciting poetry was something he added in the moment. Because he felt that the original dialogue, him and Del Toro both felt it was too cold, and it was just kind of like, too matter of fact.
Well, Carmen was a whore, so.
Yeah, but he was still a cuck, and he still loved her, so he still had to, play into that.
Well, good luck with her body, sir.
And Del Toro actually said each take was more affecting to him and heartfelt than the last, and he said he actually found himself moved to tears.
Aww.
The funny part is that he said the whole thing was almost ruined by quote unquote dead child in the background because he's got these kid actors who are doing their own thing. He said one actor rose up who was supposed to be dead in the middle of that, or the most intense reading that Federico did, and when the character was supposed to have died. And he said the kid was even bold enough to tell Del Toro that, my character was in extreme agony and was in the process of dying, but not quite there yet.
Whoa, okay.
Del Toro said that he was so impressed by the boldness and the quick-witted response that he didn't behead the actor right there on the spot.
I don't know who that child is, but I love them.
So you got very impassioned, like Del Toro sitting there crying. Also, this kid rises up that's not even supposed to be. It's like, what the fuck? And the kid's like, oh, well, I was in agony. He's like, fair play, kid.
It's like that guy on TikTok, that teacher on TikTok, and he's like, why are you up?
I love that little, whenever he mentioned that, though. I thought that was good.
Oh, my God.
When showing the scenes of how Santi died, the orphanage is shown to have more supplies, meaning it was had more food and was more prosperous. And it was almost as if the death of Santi brought about like almost curse on the place.
Yeah.
That's when everything started happening to them.
A plague of sorts. Which reminds me, because I mean, a lot of people knew about the gold and everything. And did I take it wrong that this orphanage was mostly of rich kids?
They seemed to be more well-to-do kids from the area, like the rebels that were a little bit more affluent. They sent their kids off before the real attacks happened.
Okay, and I'm assuming that they paid a pretty penny, and that's where I thought the gold was coming from, that they were hoarding.
I think it was. I don't know that it was ever implied or it ever actually said, but I think that's what they were implying, that the gold that they had was the last little bit that the people had spent, like bringing the kids in there.
Yeah, which they had quite a bit of it. And then that being said, I know that the country is in disarray and there's a war going on. I take it, I mean, maybe there's just no supplies coming to them. I mean, usually orphanages are state funded or funded by the government in some way. And the government was a little preoccupied at the moment.
Yeah, the government was actually taken over already, and like the government that was it wasn't one that actually wanted that orphanage to be functioning anyways.
Wow. And not only that, because these people were all going to die there no matter what, because it's not like they could take this gold. They had plenty of it. Well, they had enough. Anyways, it's not like they could take it and go just buy supplies for the orphanage. There's no fucking Costco nearby.
No, but they also showed that nearby town, which is where they were getting their supplies, was overrun, at least toward the end, by the fascist element. So that even if they did have like backroom areas where they could get that, which I'm sure they still had, I mean, it was that they really had to tread lightly in order to be able to function. There was a scene, however, that they showed how they got some of their stuff, and that was Dr. Casares saying that he sold his rum, as nasty as it is, to the local people because they claimed that it would cure their remedies or their ills, I guess, as it were.
Yeah, and I mean, as gross as it is, yes, but cultures have some weird fucking beliefs, man.
Well, I mean, if you go back and you look at some like the home folk remedies on how to like cure stuff, a lot of times you're wrapping wounds in like pure dirt and mud.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so, I mean, it's, it would stop the bleeding for sure, but then they didn't know that bacteria existed in that dirt either. So you had that to worry about. One other thing, this isn't the notes. I don't think I put it in there, but all the good characters had like C names: Carlos, Casares, Carmen, and all the bad people had semi-bad people had J names like Jaime, Jacinto, that sort of thing.
Those sound like H's. I'm just kidding.
Well,
I'm
Jamie,
joking. Yeah.
Jacinto.
Okay, fine. Jacinto. It reminds me of like pinto beans.
The flies that follow, and I love this element to his character as a ghost. The flies that follow Casares after his return as a ghost are digital. And I just love the fact that they did that. Like that was a tie-in that you knew it was him coming back because his character had the flies already landing on his dead body. And then later, whenever you saw the figure walking, the flies were following his, spirit. Del Toro actually tried to get the same effect in his earlier film Kronos, but didn't have the budget for digital effects. So they actually had a fly expert come in and apply a concoction to the same actor, Federico Lupi, that was basically liquid shit. And this is how Del Toro described it to the actor. And then they released thousands of flies. Immediately after releasing the flies, they all found a small hole somewhere in the set and flew away. And Del Toro explained, of course they all flew away. It smells like shit in here.
What the hell? That actor, I hope he was compensated.
I hope so too. I mean, but in this film, they didn't cover him in the shit paste. They made it, at least they had the budget for digital flies.
Okay, well, thank God, because Jesus.
Yeah, some of the stuff people do to get this stuff to happen in real life. Del Toro told the composer, this is what I was talking about earlier, not to write music for the scene where Jacinto is attacked by the boys. And the reason for that is he feels that whenever a director puts music in a scene, he confers like a sense of affirmation that he agrees with whatever is happening in that scene. Now, I don't know if all directors think this way, but at least that's how Del Toro's thought is. So he wanted to remain ambiguous as to where he wanted to believe that Jacinto deserved that particular painful death. So that's why it's completely silent when it comes to music, because it's like, well, as a director or God, basically, of the scene, he stepped back and said, I'm taking myself out of this. He dies. You can decide whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. So go at it. I think that's an interesting way to look at it. I mean, I never thought about that, but I do know a lot of directors use you definitely see it in like some of the Marvel movies, like whenever a bad guy is about to get their comeuppance, they always do the swelling heroic music to confirm that the heroes are in the right for attacking this person. So.
Okay. And he clearly puts a lot of thought into what he does. So, I mean, it's kind of cool. It obviously means a lot to him too.
Yeah, I mean, when you hear him describe he puts a lot of thought into like the meanings just even the scenes themselves, but like the music and everything.
Yeah.
And it's just it's really cool to hear because I mean, you get a lot more artistic sense out of it than just somebody who's like, all right, I got paid $3 million for this. Let's get this fucker out of here. You know, you don't get that, There is a goof in this movie though. The weight of the gold that Jacinto attached to his belt and eventually proved his undoing was actually too much for his pants to have actually held up in real life if he was attaching that many gold bars to it. So he would have been like sans pants toward the end of the movie.
Oh, yeah.
If he would have.
That's hella funny.
So just a quick tangent before we get into the Changeling. Do you want to discuss any kind of things about the orphanage, since we already kind of brought it up, and it kind of has links to this in thematic ways, I feel like, if nothing else?
I thought the orphanage was very blue in tone. And now that we know about these movies, I feel like the orphanage could have just been like they moved into the orphanage that we just witnessed in this film,
Well, I watched The Orphanage because it'd been a while since I've seen it, just to kind of, have some kind of comparison, because I couldn't remember a whole lot about it. That movie, there's a reason that it's tone blue, is because that movie's all about grief and sadness.
Oh my God.
I mean, that movie is
such a sad movie. Yeah. And it's funny because, like, as a mom, and moms have a different attachment to their sons than they do their daughters. It's not that, I love my daughter any less, but like it's different with sons. And I'm like, I couldn't tell you what kind of decision I would make as that mom, honestly. Yeah, because clearly she makes a very strong decision at the end of the movie. A
very strong decision.
I feel like if anything, like I'd be like, okay, we're going to stay in this house, but these are the times we're going to play hide and seek. You need to chill the fuck out when mom's asleep. And I will put a line of salt to prevent you from coming into my room if you're going to keep these naughty games up.
The thing that got me about that movie is just the fact that I did not realize. I mean, it's also got the it's even got the fantasy the old fairy tale element that we was talking about, because instead of Hansel and Gretel, this is Peter Pan. I mean, it's the reverse Peter Pan movie. It's like you've got a grown up Wendy who's got the children, the boys from Neverland who can never age. Well, there's a girl in there too, but like, I mean, so like there's a reason that it keeps coming up throughout the movie, the whole, story of Peter Pan. That's because that movie is that, but it's in reverse.
Yeah. Oh God. So going into the orphanage, not a ton, but yeah, the blue tone, it was blue though. Like it feels like it was blue in the house, but on the outside, because it was kind of near, I feel like, an ocean of sorts, or
it's right beside the ocean and the lighthouse, and
it's not as bluish tone when they're outside. It feels more lively when they're outside the house.
It does. There's more colors outside.
Yes.
I don't know, I'm sure there's some intent behind that, that there's happier memories for her outside. Because, I mean, if you go and you remember the beginning of the movie, that's where they played all the time, was outside. So maybe that's why it's lighter outside, is because there's more happiness.
I think so, because that's what it feels like,
But there's that whole thing about the kids got, HIV, which is already bad enough, the kids, doomed to die. And then he it's got that. And then, that there's something bad going to happen when he's talking to Tomas and the caves. And he's like, yeah, come on back with me. And I'm like, no, damn it. You never tell him to come back. What the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah.
But then, like, it turns out Tomas is like this horribly tragic kid himself, who's almost like a Santi character.
Yes.
Really. I mean, there really is a close similarity between the two of them. Because even though he's hideous in his appearance, like he was just a kid that was actually abused quite badly as a child.
Yeah, I feel like this whole film, like once you make it to the end of it, is just tragedy upon tragedy, and everyone experiences it at some point, being the dad being the last one, when he comes to his realization.
Yeah, that she was right the entire time, and that he lost her and everything because he refused to believe her.
Oh yeah.
If he would have stayed there, he could have convinced her not to do what she did, but he didn't. And then, of course, the horrible realization that the sound that she heard that she thought was a ghost banging on the wall was actually the poor child.
Trying
Simone,
to escape.
He fell investigating, Tomas's little house, as he called it, which was basically boarded up. Which, now that I bring that up, is an interesting correlation of the Changeling. The fact that the wall that led to the area where the kid was dead at was actually sealed off, just like in the Changeling.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So it actually has links to both films.
It really does. And I'm just now realizing that too. So, oh my God. So it's been a minute since I've watched The Orphanage, though. I saw The Orphanage clearly before I ever saw The Devil's Backbone, and I really liked that movie. And like we mentioned earlier in this podcast, clearly a Guillermo del Toro film, although it is, but it isn't. Well, no, because
I feel like it goes way more tragic than he allows his movies to go.
Yeah, and I guess it kind of, because you think of Pan's Labyrinth, you think of other horror films he's made, and this was closer to what we saw in The Devil's Backbone.
Yes. I do want to throw out, though, that he did go on to do another ghost film called Crimson Peak.
Mm-hmm.
And that movie to me is not very good. It has an all-star cast, which is unfortunate. I mean, it has Jim Beaver in it, a Bobby Singer fan.
Yeah.
And it's got Loki in it, Tom Hiddleston. It's got the guy who played in the Sons of Anarchy, that played the main character in that, that everybody was hot for a minute. Charlie Hunman, I believe is his name. But it's got these amazing actors in it, and it's got a bigger budget. I mean, obviously, because it was Del Toro, like later on, whenever he, established himself in Hollywood. But the heart's missing from the movie. Like every time I watch that movie, I keep trying to get into it, and like I'm so so dull. Like it's so like it's just lacking something. It doesn't have even Hellboy. Like it didn't have any of the passion. It didn't seem like. If it was, it's not on screen like it was in those previous movies.
Maybe those weren't his films, because you can tell when you say that there's no heart. Well, those are films that he's the creator of them, but he didn't create Hellboy. And I don't know about the other film that you mentioned. I don't know.
I'm not talking. No, he had passion in Hellboy. I'm talking about Crimson Peak. There's no
Crimson
passion.
That's weird.
It's like, it's like his movie, but like it's such a. I mean, and it's another gothic romance type, like setting. Because I mean, it's the ancient castle. It's the there's spirits there. It's like it's more of a gothic romance than what Devil's Backbone is. Because like I said, he broke conventions with Devil's Backbone. Setting at modern times, whereas Crimson Peak is actually set during the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So, I mean, it has like more of a link to the Victorian age, but like there's just something. I mean, it should have been a perfect setup for him to just knock it out of the park. But like whenever you watch it, like the CGI ghosts are even like bad design. It's like you did a great ghost with no budget in this Devil's Backbone. Why did you make these red like mist like or muddy messes that almost look like they're barely better than what was in the Haunting of Hill House, it's the House on Haunted Hill. It's like, I mean, I don't know. It's just like all of it. It's just like you got all this great cast, and like Tom Hiddleston, I could care less about in it. He doesn't have any of the charm that he brings to like any of the characters that like especially Loki that he's done.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's an odd film, and I don't know why. I wanted to love it because I was like, shit, yeah. I mean, I'd already known about Devil's Backbone, and I was like, sign me up for Crimson Peak because I know that he can do this. And then when I watched it, I was like, did I just spend 2 hours watching this? What did he do to this movie? I mean,
okay, do you think that it's same shit, different day? So he's done the story one too many times. And two, do you think he does better with Mimic was one of the films he did, right?
Mimic was a film that he did.
Okay,
yes.
he had big actors in that. Okay, I'm thinking does he do better with Spanish actors?
I wouldn't say that because I do feel like Hellboy was was really good and creative for what, he was working somebody else's property, but you could tell that he really, like even like when he brought Seth MacFarlane in to do the character who's kind of like a ghost trapped in a robot's body, he made Seth MacFarlane's quirkiness, work as the character. It's, he was almost doing like Klaus the Fish as far as his accent in the movie, but like it worked. for the character itself. Like he made it work. It's just, but like, and that was the thing when I watched, I don't know why Crimson Peak is such a dud for me when I watch it. It just, it's got everything there. It's like, I mean, it's like this high rise building that looks like on the outside it's constructed perfectly, but you get inside and it's like, it's falling apart like on the interior. There's the story is just not as, captivating as what he normally does. I don't know. I don't know what he did with it.
I don't know. Sometimes, we just sometimes though they can't always have a big hitter,
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I just, but you figured that would have been like his big, like the big thing for him to be able to really knock it out of the park, and I just don't understand why it didn't. You know?
Anything else about the orphanage though?
Orphanage, I mean, like I said, I mean it's a really good film, and I mean it beats the shit out of Crimson Peak, so I mean I highly recommend it. I mean, even if it is only tangentially related to Del Toro, I mean you can tell that he had some influence on it at some point in the creation.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but would you agree that The Orphanage was kind of a slow burn?
It is, and I'm surprised you like it.
I know
given that fact.
I know. I liked it. I think maybe because the ending was such a I don't know why it was so unexpected from me and everything, and maybe it was just because there was just so much sadness that towards the end you're like, oh my god, this is horrific. Definitely falls into that horror genre because it's a horror of a different kind of a possibility. Sans the ghost, of course, but like. Even if that kid wasn't chasing a ghost and he was like playing hide and seek and he fell down a set of stairs, and it just so happens that, no, it's not so much fell down, but yeah, he was trying to knock to get out. He ended up just dying, because the mom doesn't know what's going on.
He actually fell. There's the banister leading up. The stairs broke and he fell and hit his head. And that, I mean, like Santi, I mean, in that sense, he actually, I mean, it doesn't show the same kind of fracture, but he hit his head falling, and that's why, and he was trapped in the basement, and that's why and they didn't know he was even down there.
Yeah, I don't know. That's just, I mean, everything involved with it, it just gave it so much feeling to the movie. So I was just like, oh my God, I've been watching all this wondering what it leads up to, and what it led up to was worth it. It was definitely rewarding in the end.
The one thing that I thought was interesting about it is the character of Tomas, where he has like the weird scarecrow mask on. Was interesting watching it, and light of the fact that Trick or Treat is one of my favorite movies, and it's almost like Sam, from Trick or Treat and him are like kindred spirits, and they came out the same exact year.
Oh my God! And that it was creepy. That mask was creepy.
And they even had, like, if you watch it, like, Tomas has the same, because, like, one of the best things about Trick or Treat, and I love that movie so much, is that Sam being played by a real child, and you can tell he's a child just the way that he moves, because kids move different than adults, the way that their gait is, but not only that, but the way he breathes, you can kind of, like, just his whole body kind of moves.
Yeah.
The same thing with Tomas in the movie. It's the same kind of, like, little kid in a mask. It's like, when he pulls his mask down, he's like... You can like hear him like he's trying to get like some air behind the mask, just like a kid would if he was wearing one of those.
Yeah. Great observation.